Well, hi again, everybody, and welcome to 100 Yards of Football. This is the special show that we have, the Take 5 show with Steven Travers, and today we have a very special guest. Steven is a little corrected in his behavior and his manner because we've got a Major League umpire. Paul Nauert is joining us here today. We're going to talk a little bit of baseball. We're going to talk about the history of the game, reasons Paul got involved in the big leagues. We're going to talk about some of the great decisions that umpires made and maybe the direction where baseball is going, obviously with the technology and how that affects the human effort that is such a part of the officiating of any professional sports league. But Steven, want to first begin with you have an opportunity. You get to talk to an umpire. I think that outside corner belongs to him. He's going to say that you missed. It was on the black. It was not a strike, and you're never going to get that call.
Well, you know, as a former pitcher, I have a special relationship with umpires. I think pitchers and catchers have special relationships with umpires. So from my standpoint, I wanted to work fast, and I wanted to work fast for several reasons. One, I just wanted to be in the rhythm of the game. I wanted to be in sync with my catcher. The fans like it, and your defense likes it, but perhaps most importantly, the umpire appreciates it. So, Paul, why don't you tell me how do you feel about pitchers dawdling on the mound, taking too much time on the mound, spending too much time with the rosin bag, digging holes in the dirt that don't need to be dug, looking at the American flag, contemplating existentialism, and these various things, as opposed to staring in like Bob Gibson or like Steve Travers, getting that sign, knowing what the sign is really ahead of time because you're working with the catcher, and keeping the game going. How does that affect you, or is that something you appreciate, or do you put that out of your mind?
Well, first, let me say thank you for having me. And I would say, Stephen, you were probably the exception than the norm of what we're looking at today. So I grew up in the game that was exactly what you described. Pitchers got the ball, pitchers worked. And you wanted to keep the game moving for the very reasons that you said. Keeps the defense on their toes. It keeps everybody alert. It makes things happen. Our game today just got so watered down with so much individualism and stats and egos that, you know, we just spent a lot of wasted time doing nothing. And that eventually has led baseball to eventually now put a rule in with the 20-second clock to help speed up the games again because it just got so bad.
Paul, if you don't mind me saying, I think part of the reason, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm just as a gentle observer, anytime you get into the playoffs, it's going to slow down anyways. And you're going to have a little bit longer, slower walk to the mound from a manager. He's going to, you get a couple extra seconds here and there in between pitches. And I think the network said, hey, man, this is supposed to be a 3-hour game, and it's 3 hours, 20 minutes. It's going into my other programming. You got to speed this up. And that's playoff baseball. Most standard regular season, you go May through at least August, but maybe in September it slows down a little bit in some cases. Is there any truth to it? The networks are as much to blame for this, not the time clock of just a playoff action.
Well, that is true. But if you look at game times, like I said, when I came up into the big leagues in '95, our average game time was about 2.5. It started to drift closer to 3 hours, and then it went over 3 hours, and we were playing 3.5, 4-hour 9-inning ball games.
Yeah.
Now in the postseason, one of the other issues is they add extended breaks. So instead of a 2-minute commercial break, they'll make it 2:25 or 3 minutes. So that in itself lengthens the game. But yeah, in the postseason, there's more intentionality of doing things right and not rushing through. And so it probably does affect the game a little, but just through the course of the season, our games just got slower.
It seems, yes. And I agree with you. And that's just one of my motives is of the many different reasons it would be, you're going to take, there's more on the line. So playoff games will last a little longer. I'd forgotten about, but yes, it makes perfect sense if you got additional commercials and then the time in between when you've got more pitching changes, you guy that only gets to face one or two batters before you move, all of that condensed into a game that was taking a little bit too long. And obviously the clock is designed to keep fans in tune. It's such a fan-centric game, isn't it?
Yes, it is, and it's a media directed game now. You know, they get so much money from ESPN and Fox to air these games that they're basically telling MLB what they want and how how much time they need and what to expect. So the fans are driving it. MLB is listening to the fans, but they're listening to where the money's coming from as well.
Well, on Sunday, July 7th, 1963, Paul Edward Nauert was born. You're in Louisville, Kentucky. You spent most of your youth there in Louisville. We teased just before we came on. I'm expecting you to be a Cardinal, but your family is a bunch of Wildcats. You're in Cardinal territory, but talk a little bit about the sports world for you as you were growing up, and basketball obviously being a big part of that. I mentioned the race just for fun. I mean, when in Rome, doesn't everybody go to the race at least at one point or another? And all the other influences that you had when you were growing up.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in a family of 9 kids, and there were 7 boys. So we were always competitive. We were always playing sports. Baseball again was my first love as a kid playing. But I was also a big basketball fan, and I played all of them, but I loved playing baseball more. And then living in Louisville, we were close to Churchill Downs, so that was nothing to drive by and go visit. But that city has actually grown a lot over the years. But Louisville was a great place to grow up, and I maintained my love for Kentucky basketball my whole life. And some of my members of my family defected and became Cardinal fans.
Growing up, I know Adolph Rupp in the early '60s, probably when you were just too young to really understand it, but it was part of the family tradition. About the time you're in high school, Louisville with Denny Crum had a fantastic team. There's Darrell Griffith, Scooter, and Rodney McRae. There were a lot of great players that were right there in your backyard. So I can see how basketball being a great influence on your life growing up. You went out for the team in high school?
I went out for the baseball team in high school, but I got cut. So I didn't make it, and that kind of was the end of my baseball playing days.
Okay, and then basketball, obviously a little earlier than that, right? Was there a certain height limit? I'm not going to be 6'5", and that's what I need to be in order to get to the next level.
Yeah, I actually didn't start most of my growing till I got out of high school. So I was only 5'7" when I was in high school, and now I'm 6 foot. But most of my growing I experienced after I actually graduated. So I was too small to play basketball.
But you enjoyed the game thoroughly. Getting to go to the campus there, was football a part of that as well when you had Kentucky Wildcat football?
Football was never as big as basketball. They were, like, okay, they're playing because it's not basketball season. But it wasn't. People didn't really jump on the Wildcat wagon for football as much as they do now. Now it's a lot more exciting. They've got a great coach there, Mark Stoops. He's built a good program, and so people are getting excited for football.
Was there any particular game or player within a game from the basketball perspective when you go there on campus at Kentucky and get to watch him play that goes, this is so cool, right? Whether you're 5 or 9 or 18 years old, and was there a special memory that you have that go, this is something I love being around sports, and this is the reason why?
Yeah, I saw several great players come through Kentucky. Winston Bennett was, because he was a Louisville kid, was always one of my favorites at Kentucky. But I remember going to see Tubby Smith when they were in Tampa in the regionals, and they beat Duke and they beat UCLA to go to the Final Four. I remember being in Atlanta to see them play. I mean, each team was special. The last national championship team that Calipari had with Anthony Davis and it was just a great team. Michael Kidd-Gilchrist, and so I've enjoyed watching these kids come through. The only thing that disappointed me over the years is we had a lot of one and dones, and it was hard to get to know the players as much as I used to.
Yeah, I think that's really changed the game in a way where I've always used the expression of, the Wichita State Shockers had a great team and there were a bunch of juniors on it. And the next year you're looking forward to seeing if they're able to advance and get to the second or third. Can they get it to the Elite Eight? You know, do they have the ability to do that? Because I remember last year how good that they only had one senior. You take notification of little things and put it away. With the one and done, you don't have that luxury. From a time perspective, you better enjoy it right now, and it's going to be gone in a very short amount of time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was the best part of being a Kentucky fan, is you got to see the same people year in and year out. You got to know them a little bit, and so senior day was always a special day because you're saying goodbye to kids that you idolized. And now, I mean, we don't have many seniors anymore.
Yep. Yeah, they leave early or they move on when they get the opportunity to do so. Very, very seldom do they stick around, at least at the big universities, the basketball factories.
Right.
Some places, smaller conferences, of course, they don't have that same option in terms of, I don't have a whole bench full of 5 stars. Right. We're going to play our seniors and they're going to get their education, et cetera, all of that. Baseball, let's go back to that. Was there a time in high school or college where you started thinking about the umpire career aspect of it, or did you want to be a broadcaster? Obviously, you wanted to be a center fielder for the Yankees. Everybody does, but what was the impetus that put you into start to think about this as being a business for you?
Well, it was interesting because after I graduated high school, I went to college and not even thinking about baseball any longer. And I just could not figure out what I wanted to do. And it was a friend of mine who we were playing in a band, and he suggested, he said, I'm going to go to this umpire school in Florida. Do you want to go? And I didn't really know much about the umpiring side of the game. All I really heard was Florida, 5 weeks, and that sounded like a vacation. So I went to the Harry Wendelstedt Umpire School in Daytona Beach, Florida. And after the 5 weeks, you're evaluated everything from rules to your ability on the field to, just the way that you can physically umpire the game and see all the things you need to see. And I was actually told at the end of the 5 weeks, you're not going to be a professional umpire. And then there were 2 words that they said this year. Basically, he told me, he said, you need experience. You need to go home and really, really work on the things that we told you and think about coming back. And I didn't know if that was ever going to happen again, but I took it to heart. I went home and I started working Little League, and I got into high school baseball, and I was even doing softball. But I had to make a decision the following year to go back to the umpire school, and it cost money. So I had to borrow money to go. But I went down with just one thing in mind. I said, if I don't make it, it's not going to be because I didn't try. And I was very, very fortunate that I finished as the top returning student that next year. And that started my career in professional baseball.
Paul, you're telling me that you went with 0 experience, and they said at one point or another, they're not telling you you're good, but they're saying that you're good enough that you've got the ability and we want to see this pursue, but you didn't have any aspirations. You were what would you do in your band first and foremost? Were you the singer? Were you the lead?
I was the singer. Yes.
What's your genre? What were you singing?
Well, I'm still a 70s rock guy, but I am now playing the guitar, so I play a lot of different things. I love the easy listening guitar music of Bread, of 3 Dog Night. So anything that's got a good beat to it, I love to play. But
Jeremiah.
When I went to umpire school, I didn't even own a uniform. I actually went to Kmart and bought a pair of gray pants and a light blue shirt just so I had something that looked like it fit.
How about that? Wow. Steven, who would have thought that a guy that never had any aspirations to be an umpire would be in the big leagues in just a short amount of time?
Well, he almost went through the desert on a horse with no name. But you talk about your desire to do what you do, which reminds me, just a short anecdote. I was released by the St. Louis Cardinals, and I had not finished college, and I was accepted to the University of Southern California, where I still needed a couple of years to get my degree. And I was really excited to go, but I just was not ready to say no to baseball. I felt that I still had something left, even though I had injured myself, and I went back. And I ended up signing with the Oakland Athletics, which leads me to my question. With the A's, this was the early 1980s, and the manager at the top was Billy Martin. And if you recall that era, and I don't mean to sound like an old man who says, well, back in my day, we slogged to school through 10 miles of sleet and snow. But in my day, it is true. If we were starting pitchers, we went 9. We were expected to go 9, and I went 9 many, many times, and that was unquestionably the concept under a Billy Martin regime. And in that respect, when you pitch 9 innings, you develop a relationship with the umpire, because you're not just there 4 innings, 5 innings on a pitch count. You're working, and the umpire is getting tired just like you're getting tired, and you're developing a rapport with him, and you're understanding what his calls are and how that affects what you're doing. So talk a little bit about back in the day when pitchers did pitch longer into the game, your relationship with them as the game went along, as opposed to what's going on today.
Well, I got to tell you, first of all, I knew the entire lineup for the Oakland A's all through the 70s on their run. So I was a huge Oakland A fan just because they all had the mustaches except for the little shortstop, Bert Campaneris. But, to pitching, you're absolutely right, because, again, when I started, pitchers went 7, 8 innings. They had a closer that would come in, and that was a quality start. And today, our pitchers are pitching 5 innings. And that's considered a quality start. And they're at 100 pitches in 5 innings. Back in the day, you had pitchers could throw 9 innings and might not even get to 100 or just a little bit over. So the game has changed. On the pitchers, they have specialties. So one guy can only just get lefties out. One guy can only pitch middle innings. One guy and so they bring in all of these different guys when I'm thinking, well, gosh, the starter was still pitching pretty good. Why didn't you just leave him in? But that's not the way the game is anymore. It's changing. It's like I said, there's specialties for every position now. Some guys can only pinch hit left-handed pitchers. Some guys can only pinch hit right-handed. And that's just where the game is evolving to.
Yeah. I've always had some affinity for umpires, and this goes back to the fact that there was an umpire that I knew all through high school and all through college, and his name was Roy Roth. And he umpired at all levels, and he actually umpired at the major league level when the umpires went on strike in 1982. He was a regular umpire in the Pacific 10 Conference, maybe even the Pacific 8 Conference before it was the Pacific 10, but he was also a high school umpire and a summer league umpire. I got to know him very well. And in fact, he was a bird dog for the St. Louis Cardinals and played a very big role in the Cardinals signing me to my first professional contract. So in that respect, I understood umpires because I understood Roy. I understood where he was coming from and what his motivations were. And so I saw umpires as humans. Now, I did something that I'd like to ask you about. Even though I'm a tall guy, you probably look at me, and a lot of scouts looked at me and saw he probably throws 95 miles an hour. I did not. I was told, fairly early on, you've got good stuff, you've got really good control, you've got great breaking stuff, but you don't throw hard enough to get to the big leagues on your fastball alone. You need an out pitch. And I developed a screwball. A guy told me at the time, 3 pitchers had won the Cy Young Award throwing the screwball in the past 10 years, those being Mike Cuellar, Mike Marshall, and Fernando Valenzuela. And there were many others. It was a very effective pitch. Oftentimes, through college and into professional ball, I would actually find the umpire before the game, maybe after I'd thrown my warm-ups, maybe just before national anthem. At some point, I'd get to him, or I'd also maybe work with my catcher and let him know, I have a special pitch that you may not have seen or may not be aware of. It's a screwball. It's going to go the opposite way of a slider and might catch you by surprise. And it tends to catch the outside of the plate. And a lot of times the catcher is catching it outside the zone, but it's crossing the plate. If you appreciate it, be aware of it. How often did pitchers come to you or catchers come to you and tell you about, well, this guy has a particular pitch, or his slider has a lot of late movement, or his cut has a lot of late movement? You really got to watch for it, because it's gonna be hard for me to bring it back in, the catcher saying, but it's a strike. I want you to give it the benefit of the doubt. If you talk to that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot of conversation that happens between the plate umpire and the catcher, and there's a great relationship. In fact, some of the best people I met in the game were catchers, but they would, periodically come out and tell you exactly what you said, that he's going to throw this pitch, and he's got a curveball, he's got a slider, he's got a fastball, he's got a changeup. My first question to them was, can he throw strikes? So if there was a particular pitch in a game that I balled and the pitcher and the catcher wanted the pitch, he would just say, Paul, I think that's a good pitch. My answer is then, that's fine. Just make sure I can see it. And sometimes I just need to take a better look at it. Sometimes I need you to hold it just a little bit longer for that pitch like you're talking about that may have just touched the plate, but he's catching a little bit off the plate. So give me a chance to process this. But if you're just catching it and pulling the glove quickly and throwing it back, I may not give you the pitch if I don't see it that well. But the good catchers realize that if they want a tough pitch, they need to just hold it for you a little bit longer. And we had some really good catchers in our day. So that made our job easier. And if they were just pulling the glove and throwing it back 10 times out of 10, they were saying we didn't want the pitch. It's the ones that they were holding that they're like, we would like to get this pitch. So as long as they were helping you out, I was trying to find strikes for you.
Right.
Paul, is it fair to say that growing up, Johnny Bench was your guy?
Mm.
You had Ted Sizemore there with St. Louis. I'm a Dodger fan, so I had Ferguson and Yeager. Gene Tennis had a mustache. We talked about the A's a little bit. When you start getting your way up into the big leagues and moving up, you got Pudge Rodriguez or Carlton Fisk. You got these guys, and you may have idolized them when you were younger. And now you're basically, were you the guy that put your hand on the shoulder of the catcher? Were you real close like that?
No, I didn't put my hand on them. So we were always taught to work up in the slot, but there were times where I was trying to get in to see a pitch and the catcher was trying to slide over to catch an inside pitch, and we would bump. And so basically the conversation is we both got to do our job, and just figure out how to do it. But I didn't like touching them, and most of the guys didn't really like being touched.
Yeah. My first year I get to Atlanta, and he was late because he also played baseball, and Deion Sanders shows up at the end of training camp. Actually, it was probably week 4 of the season before he was made eligible to play. Were there any guys that you go, man, that's Barry Bonds right there? The first time that you got to pinch yourself, say, these are legends, and McGuire, let's say, or Sosa, and I'll mention any other name you want to, but who were the guys that you said, hey, Dad, I just met so-and-so, and he's probably one of the coolest dudes ever. I really enjoy what I got to do today.
I mean, it was when I first got to the big leagues, it was all of those guys that I had kind of watched growing up. But the players that I idolized were now pretty much managers or coaches. And some of them didn't really have great relationship with umpires like you were talking about, Steve. So I learned very quickly. I no longer became a fan of like those individuals. I became a fan of the game always, but you figure out who the good people are in the game and who's not, who gets along with umpires well and who doesn't. And so that kind of skewed my whole Cincinnati Red relationship of being a big Red fan to some guys were very nice to me. Some guys weren't.
Yeah.
But you talk about Bonds. I mean, Bonds was a great player, but Barry Bonds didn't really talk to umpires that much. There were other players that's all they did was talk. So you just figure out from a personality standpoint, what's going to work for each individual. And I think
Yeah.
that's what made our job is you get past player umpire and you get into relationships. And I think that's what helps us going down the road is they get to know you as a person. We get to know them as a person. And so when a situation comes up or a dispute comes up, it's not an all out screaming match. It becomes a conversation again.
Yeah. About this specific incident play. Go ahead, Steven.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely correct. And the umpire is a person and the players are people, and you have to understand that. And you can have a bad day and you can miss a call. And if you miss a call, I don't see any value in screaming and yelling and besmirching the umpire's heritage or anything like that. And I'll give you an example. I was pitching a game, and I threw a pitch that was a straight fastball right down the middle of the plate. And the batter knew it was a strike, and the catcher knew it was a strike, and the fans knew it was a strike, and I knew it was a strike, and the umpire just missed it. Maybe he was thinking about an argument with his wife. Maybe he had a little too many cocktails the night before. Maybe he just closed his eyes, but he missed it. And, I looked in and gave it a second, like, but I didn't say anything. And I didn't, then maybe there was some booing from the stands. I didn't say anything. And I was working the game and I gotten calls before this, and I wanted to get calls after this. So there's a couple of points I want to make. First, when the inning ended, I think it was as the inning ended, I was headed back to the dugout, and I passed by the umpire, and I didn't show him up. I didn't yell and scream. I didn't wave my hands, but I said this. I said, and I know that NASA scientists could not more perfectly place a baseball in the middle of the strike zone than that pitch that I threw. And he said, you're absolutely right. And the rest of the game, I got all the calls that I was looking for. And when the game was over and I won the game, that umpire found me out, and he said to me, been in this game for 10 years, and that is the smartest and best argument that I've ever heard from a player. And if more of you were approached us that way, you'd get along a lot better than that. And I said, well, I thank you. I hope I did handle it the right way. He said that is the way to do it. So, talk a little bit about different ways that pitchers and catchers and managers deal with you. Some of the little tricks that they have, stories that I just told. Have you heard certain things like that, or horror stories that these people are saying? And what makes someone think that yelling and screaming and being terrible to an umpire is going to work for them in the long run?
Well, I think people imitate what they see, first of all. And there were plenty of videotapes of Billy Martin and Earl Weaver and others who put on a show on the field. And so people just think that's the way that it's supposed to happen. But I would tell you that, first of all, for me, and I think this was pretty much true for most of the guys that worked in the big leagues with me, when a pitch is missed, I probably know it's missed before you know it's missed. And I think any umpire would tell you that it's almost kills us to miss a pitch. We try to get every one of them. And when we do, we're probably harder on ourselves than you would ever think that you could be on us. So you're right. The yelling and the screaming doesn't help because I'm probably already frustrated at myself for missing the pitch. But that's where the catcher is pretty much the buffer between the pitcher and you, because he's the one that say, I'll take care of him. And especially if he knows that you're really trying hard and you're working and you're trying to get the pitches, he'll just say, I'll go out and talk to him to keep the pitcher from getting ejected or losing his mind. Sometimes the pitcher doesn't have to say anything, his body language. And John Smoltz was huge at just kind of fainting on the mound when he didn't get a pitch. And sometimes you just have to have the conversation to say, listen, tell him to quit fainting on the mound. I'll try to get the pitches. Okay. And so the catcher, again, is probably your best friend back there. If he's one that you can work with, because he's going to help diffuse a lot of situations that could get bad.
There are so many different accounts. I have one, if you don't mind me sharing real quick. My 14-year-old son now, there's a picture of John, who's obviously a legend here in Atlanta. He's a left-handed batter, pretty good power hitter. He hit 12 home runs when he was 12, over the fence type stuff. He had some power. But as a lefty, he would have the right-handed batter's box. It seemed like it was not on the white, it wasn't on the black, it was over the line in the batter's box on the other side of the plate, and he'd get rung up time after time. And my wife or me would be sitting behind home plate. We'd go, what the heck? So I met a friend at a radio station here in Atlanta, and he was an umpire, same kind of age group, anywhere between 9 and maybe 14 or 15. And I said, here's what I want to do. I want to tell my son to say the plate is 17 and a half inches. And I couldn't finish. He goes, don't you dare. He stopped me right there. Don't you dare. You're going to get thrown out. You're going to get your kid thrown out. That's not the way you do it. Here's what you do. You ask the umpire on that pitch, is that your limit? And I'd never heard that before. And I said, what? He goes, ask the umpire. Have your son ask, is that your limit? And now the umpire's thinking, that ball might have been a little bit too far outside. I may have, and it gets everybody to think. And it's a very calm, non-abrasive way. You don't have to yell. You don't have to kick sand on anybody to say that you just disagree with it. Paul, would you say that there's any truth in just asking the umpire, hey, I'm not saying you missed it, but I need to know where the strike zone is for me to bat, or for a pitcher to say, I need to know where it is so I can pitch around it and get balls that are close enough that they're going to be strikes in the 4th, 7th, 8th, and 9th inning.
Well, I would say those conversations happen a lot.
Sure.
And to the point of the left-handed batter, it really is. It's a proven fact. There's probably more missed pitches called strikes on a left-handed batter from a left-handed pitcher because it's the way the catcher catches it. He's pretty much got his hand here, but if it's a right-handed here, you can see the reach a lot more. So a left-handed hitter with the catcher just kind of catching it, even if he's off the plate, it's harder for an umpire to judge exactly where it was. But several times throughout my career, the catcher would say, hey, are we going to get that pitch? Or a hitter would say, is that as far as you're going to go? And if I thought that maybe I could go a little further, I might say, no, I think I can get a little more. Or if he'd say, is that as far as you're going to go? I could say, yes, it is. But I know when Maddox and Glavine both pitched and they lived on the corners, they didn't ask, but they would throw it, what I would say, on the corner. And if you called it a strike, he was going to go just a little bit farther.
Yeah.
If you called that a strike, he was going to go a little bit farther. If you balled that, he went back to the last place that you called it, and he lived there the entire game. And that's how good they were. So you have to establish to yourself that if I'm going to call that pitch, I got to get it for the entire game. And you can't call it in the first inning and not call it in the ninth. You got to be consistent with it. So that was part of the trade of what you work for in your career, is learning how to set your strike zone and be consistent with it.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because here in Atlanta, obviously the Smoltz, the Glavines, the Maddoxes, even Avery when he was there, and any of the others, there'd be pitches and they'd show highlights still today. You can see them on YouTube. And this is 2 balls outside, but it was a strike a little bit earlier in the 4th inning. And in the 7th inning, he's going to nibble on that same corner. And the batters are just going, I can't believe you're calling that. That pitch is 4 inches outside, but you're giving it to him. Is there a give and take with that, to where there'll be one on the inside corner that you won't call a ball, just to make sure that the plate, even though it doesn't move, the zone doesn't become a 22-inch zone? Is there any truth to that?
And not for me. If I missed a pitch, I missed a pitch. But I would never try to even it up or make up a call to even it up, because you lose the integrity that way. But, all of that you're talking about, Harper, that off the plate really is what led to them bringing in the machines, because they felt like that there was too much give and take on the corners off the plate.
Yeah, that makes sense. Before we go back, or before we delve a little bit deeper, take us back. After you go to the Harry Wendelstedt camp, you've got job opportunities, right? You say, I'm good. I can do this. Appalachian League in 1988. Was that your first, what we would call the professional rankings that you had? Talk a little bit about that experience.
Yeah, so pretty much every umpire, when you first get in the game, you're going to go to rookie ball, which the Appalachian League was for me. So that was, new territories and meeting new people and driving around. And so I spent 1 year in the Appalachian League, and then I got promoted. But I actually, at the end of my first year, was invited to go back and teach at the umpire school as well. And I taught at the Wendelstedt Umpire School for 20 years. And I've still been teaching clinics to the point that, as much as I wanted to perfect my craft, I wanted to be good with the rules. And so I became the teacher of the rules at the umpire school. And that really helped me to stay in the game and kind of stay on top of what was going on. And the game started to become easier for me to understand once I got into it and started teaching. So I spent 1 year in rookie ball and then got promoted to A ball.
I know Steven had a smile on his face. We'll talk about the Appalachian League a little bit more in a second, but do me a favor. I know in the military ranks, if you're a good shooter, if you're a marksman, one of the great honors that you would have is to be brought back to teach the young soldiers how to do it the right way. Is it the same way in the umpiring world? If you're good enough to do this, we want you to come back and share your knowledge and express it that way. Is that like a little badge of honor for you?
It was, because not only was it an honor for me, but I was teaching alongside what I called some of the greats of the game. A lot of the guys that were minor league umpires eventually became big league umpires. I was there with Charlie Relaford. I was there with Randy Marsh. I was there with Brian Gorman. I was there with Rich Reeker. I mean, all of these guys eventually became Jerry Davis. On top of, I met Ed Vargo, who was the National League supervisor. So you kind of were put in a spotlight of, okay, if you're teaching at the Wendelstedt Umpire School, you got to be something good. And people kind of, because not everybody could do that. And so to have that honor to be there, it was kind of special.
I would imagine not sounding like a monotone AI robot, but your ability to express and give examples of why this rule or why that rule, even though it's very rare that it occurs, you have to be ready for it. And that's pretty much what you're doing. The basic stuff everybody gets, but you're also going to remind people of that little rarely known rule and just keep bringing it up to the point where it becomes secondary knowledge instead of something, well, I got to go check with the home plate umpire and the crew chief before I make my final decision.
Well, and that's the thing, when you're teaching the rules, most of what happens in a ball game is just a fair, foul, out, safe, ball, strike. You don't get all of the crazy interferences and obstructions and fan interferences every game, but you have to be prepared for them. And so the thing that we teach and the thing that I was taught is don't let anything surprise you on the field. So every single time before the pitch is thrown, before the ball is batted, you've got to almost replay in your brain all the possible scenarios of what could possibly happen. And that's what you're looking for. And then when the ball's put in play, you just react to it. So you should never get caught off guard. Now, does it happen? Sure it happens. Do we lose focus? Sure we do. But the good umpires are the ones that you have to stay in the game. You have to pay attention to a lot more than just what's in front of you.
Did Morgana ever visit with you in the Appalachian League?
I saw Morgana probably several different places. I don't know which league. I saw Max Paxton. I saw the Captain Dynamite. So yes, I ran across them all.
Boy, you're just like last week. We had Ken Korak, was a broadcaster for the A's, and every segment that he was speaking, there were 10 things that reminded me of my day. So Max Patkin I met in the Appalachian League, and I'm looking up and I see this rubbery face inches away. I'm on the ground stretching before the game, and this face appears. And he goes, "Hey, my name is Max Patkin. I'm going to be doing my act, and do me a favor, don't get the red ass." And the only thing I could say is I read the sporting news. I know who you are, and this is before Bull Durham. But yeah, that's Max Patkin. Another Appalachian League event.
Well, Max would we'd see him so often. He'd just come in. He goes, "All right, fellas, you know the routine."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I knew his routine, and he didn't. There were other factors at play that day, but in fact, getting back to an event in the Appalachian League with an umpire, and thank goodness it wasn't you, because you said you came in '88. This was before then. So, just a little background on this. I pitched for the Johnson City Cardinals at Kingsport against the Mets. And this was mainly the Mets team that would eventually be the '86 world champions. It included Kevin Mitchell. And Mitchell was a great hitter, but as I mentioned, I had a nice screwball, and I had a good slider, and I was working 3 inches off the plate and getting this kid who was 17 years old out of high school in San Diego to swing at him. I struck him out 3 or 4 times. I struck out 15 batters that day and set an Appalachian League record, or as the actor says in Bull Durham, a new league record. So a week later, I'm pitching at Bluefield, West Virginia, against the Orioles, and I pitched a good game. I went 7 or 8 innings, but I left trailing 2-1, and we were up against a kid. I think his name was Rooker, and he was a lefty out of the University of Florida, and he was good. And son of a gun, that guy ties my league record, that day against my team. And I'm counting the strikeouts as my team is going down. I said, you got to make contact to protect my record. But anyway, the next day I'm sitting in the bullpen, and I knew all these umpires because, I was throwing complete games, and I'm talking to the umpires between innings, and talking to the second base umpire, and saying, hey, you might want to move a little bit in case I got to throw to the shortstop on a double play grounder, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, there was a line drive. I'm sitting in the bullpen, right field. There's a line drive, and it's real close to picking up chalk. And I felt the umpire had missed the call, which worked against us. And for some reason, I yelled at the guy, and I said some things that I shouldn't have said. And he goes, Travers, you are out of here. He throws me out of the game. And I'm like, God, I just gotten myself thrown out of a professional baseball game. I thought it was the greatest thing of all time. It's like, that's something to talk about the rest of my life. I've been thrown out of a professional baseball game by a professional umpire. And I sat in the stands and probably got a beer. I don't know what I did. I got a letter from the Appalachian League commissioner. He fined me like $10. I wrote him a check, and I wrote an apology and sent it back. But, I thought it was cool that I actually got myself thrown out of a game. It's like it just put me in this new league with Tom Lasorda and Billy Martin and people like that. So that was but anyway, getting back to what I had talked about earlier, talking to the umpire about, a specialty pitch. And I was a control pitcher. I did have good control, and I moved quickly, and I would do exactly. I read a great book by John Feinstein, who just passed away. It was called On the Black. It was about Maddox and Glavine, the 2 pitchers you mentioned, and how they did exactly what you were describing, how they took and took and took. And that's exactly what you do. And there was a great story, Rogers Hornsby and Ted Williams. It's probably apocryphal, but Bill Clem or some great umpire, and Hornsby takes one, and the catcher says, isn't that a strike? And Bill Clem says, Mr. Hornsby will inform you when it's a strike. So you develop a reputation. And if I was in a league long enough, I developed a reputation as a guy with control. So talk about dealing with a pitcher who really does that. And he's on the black, but he's maybe a few inches off the plate. And do you get into a routine of calling that, and to the point where he's throwing strikes, and then he's missing just a little bit, but you're so used to calling strikes, strike 3. Does that happen?
I can't say that it doesn't. I would say that if I called it a strike, I probably believed it was a strike. And again, if it was off the plate, it didn't look off the plate to me. And if you get a pitcher, though, that is pretty much around the plate, you're probably more lenient to give them the pitch than you are not. So, that it's a control thing. If you've got pitchers that are all over the place and then they bring one that's close, chances are they may not get that call. But if you got a pitcher who's got really, really good control and he happens to throw one maybe just a tad further away, but he's been working that plate pretty good, he might be inclined to get that pitch more often. So it wasn't anything that I'm like, I'm just going to give him everything. I tried to be consistent with my strike zone, but I would say that it probably could happen if he's got that good of control.
Yeah, I think there comes a point when a pitcher develops momentum, and that momentum it affects the umpire, and he's so used to calling strikes that it's like, yeah, strike three, and everyone sees it because he's just pouring it in there, and the game is moving quickly, and it's a 2-hour game.
I'm also hoping that if I'm calling strikes, that eventually gets the hitters to swing, because you don't want to have them to keep putting it on your shoulder. And that's kind of the thing that I would tell them. I'm like, look, I've been calling strikes, so if you don't want to hit the pitch, that's fine, but that's not going to keep me from calling it a strike. So
that is such a good point, Paul, and it plays to what the pitcher is doing. If the pitcher is throwing strikes, the batters quickly realize, I really don't want to take the first pitch because it's going to be a strike. And now I'm down 0-1. And if I got you 0-1, I've got you. Most pitchers, if they're good, they feel that way. And the batters quickly realize that they're on their heels. So what will happen, and this is just an aside, not necessarily a question for you, but just a point from the pitcher's angle, is they start swinging at that first pitch, and next thing you know, you've got 4 pitch innings, because that pitch, they're throwing that first pitch and it's a low strike, and they're swinging, and it's a 2-hopper to the shortstop, or it's an ICC pop up to the left fielder. And the next thing you know, you've got rhythm going, and you've gone 80 pitches in 9 innings, and the game is over in an hour 50, and you've won 2-0. And there's nothing better for a pitcher than that feeling. And it becomes a rhythm. And I think the umpire gets into it, and the hitters on the other team get into it, and your team behind you gets into it.
Well, and you were talking earlier about the game times and how the game is played. And when I came up, if a pitcher had you 0-2, chances are you were going down either one of the next 2 pitches. Today, a pitcher could have you 0-2, but it very quickly then becomes 3-2, because they keep trying to throw that ball in the dirt and in the dirt and in the dirt, and they're not swinging at it. And so that lengthens the game and puts everybody back on their heels. The more aggressive pitchers, like you're talking about, the 3 pitch innings, 4 pitch innings, it's because they just continue to go after the hitters. They don't give in.
100%. I mean, to me, if it's 0-2, why am I wasting a pitch?
Exactly.
At the 3rd strike, Gibson didn't do that. Seaver didn't do that. If those guys were going to come at you, it was going to be on the first pitch, or it was going to be some other point in the game. Why waste it on 0-2?
Right.
Maybe even accidentally hitting a guy on 0-2, and then you've got a guy on first base. Let me ask you this. And I know you started in 88, and the player I'm talking about was gone by then, but he played so much, and he's such a good friend of mine. I wondered if at any point you came across Bill Spaceman Lee. At any point did you ever umpire a game in which he was involved in it in some capacity?
No, and I know that he was with Montreal for a time, and I did get to but I don't remember, because my first game was 95. I don't know if he was still pitching in the big leagues in 95 or not. I do know who he was. I know he was playing with the Savannah Bananas for a while too, but I don't know that I came across him.
I just would have thought maybe a spring training game, or some specialty game, because he's an interesting character, and he's another guy who's gonna work every angle on
Right.
and try to get the outside of the plate. In fact, believe it or not, there's a new movie called Ephus. It's just coming out. It has some pretty good reviews, and Bill is in this movie. Just as an aside, my daughter moved to Vermont with her husband to open a bed and breakfast, and I've known Bill 30 years, and as fate would have it, he's a neighbor to my daughter. So every time I go out there, I see Bill, and we go to Red Sox games. But but he's always talking about umpires, and his great line in the baseball documentary. Someone asks him, "What's your best pitch?" And he goes, "My best pitch is a strike."
Yeah,
and it's just, that's perfect.
Well, we call those guys the characters of the game. I mean, there were umpires the same way, and that's what I think the game lacks today a little bit. We don't have those great characters.
Well, speaking of great characters, why don't you talk about some of the managers? And you say you were a National League umpire.
Started out in the National League, and then in 2000, the leagues merged.
Okay. So 88. So you saw a lot of Sparky Anderson. You really didn't. Did you see
Sparky
Billy?
Actually he had left Cincinnati about the time that I went to Detroit. So I saw him like in spring training games when he was managing the Tigers.
So who were some of the managers that stand out in various different ways? And you could be good, could be bad, could be funny, could be vitriolic. Give me some experiences of managers.
When I first got to the big leagues, I mean, we had Jim Fregosi, we had Tommy Lasorda, Bobby Cox was there.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the Met manager, the big
Valentine.
guy. No, this
Johnson.
was before. What's that?
Johnson?
No, it was before
Davey Johnson. Okay, sorry.
Bud Harrelson.
Oh, I'll get his name in a minute. But I mean, and so there was a lot of, you got to prove yourself to these guys, and they were good at picking on the young guy and seeing what they could get away with, and so you had to kind of put your feet down and establish who you were, and so there was a lot more. Like, they're going to test the younger umpires just because they already know what they can and can't get away with the older guys. So that was a lot of, and they were good managers. They knew, how to push your buttons and what they could say and what they couldn't say. But, one of the, like, Felipe Alou was around, but one of the best managers that I just got to know as a person, but I thought he was Jim Tracy. And he stayed around for a long, long time. He wasn't the name like everybody else was, but he was a good baseball man. And I had a lot of conversations. And then I got to know Terry Francona very, very well later on. And, Terry's another, what I just consider one of those smart guys in baseball.
Yeah.
But when I came up, today, most of the managers today are young kids that don't have much managing experience. And basically they're just taking orders from the front office. The managers that were in my day managed from the gut. Like, a lot of, what do we do in this situation? Well, we'll just play it like how Jimmy Leland was another one of those guys. Ron Gardenhire, who I met, just guys that just managed. Dusty Baker was a manager from his gut. And even Bruce Bochy, I thought, really did a nice job with the teams that he had. So you were around good baseball people. You had to learn the game and stay on your toes with them. I even had stints with Pinella, and the thing about Lou Pinella is, if you're working hard out there, he left you alone. He didn't bother you just to bother you.
You mentioned Dusty Baker. I was with the San Francisco Examiner, and Dusty was the manager of the Giants. And this was when Barry Bonds hit 73 homers. And he said he was having a conversation with all of the writers in the dugout before the game. And I was pretty new. And I can't remember the context, but I said something like, "Gee, Dusty, that sounds like a Potemkin village." And I don't know if you know what a Potemkin village is, but it's a historical reference to Catherine the Great, who Empress of Russia during the 18th century. And it really doesn't matter. But I'll never forget, Dusty looked at me and he goes, "What's a Potemkin village?" And he really wanted to know. And he was interested. And I just immediately, I gave him the short answer. And, the Catherine the Great was falling out of favor with her constituents, and Potemkin, her main guy, took her on a trip down the Dnieper River and created a village of happy villagers. And he was, "Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that." And so anyway, I just had developed a rapport with Dusty because he was asking questions of me. It's normally the other way around. And so you get a chance with these guys to become friends with them. I mean, it's inevitable. How do you have an argument with these guys or have some sort of confrontation, but then when the game is over, we put it aside, maybe even go out and have a cocktail or have dinner, or at least have some conversations with them, and maybe even your wives know each other? How do these personal relationships develop with these guys?
I was going to tell you that Dallas Green was the manager of the Mets.
Yes. Yeah.
So I don't think, like, outside of the game, there's where we're going out and having dinner and much happens off the field. But I think it's that relationship of, it's what I was talking about earlier. If you're working hard and they see that you're out there and you're working hard and you're trying, I think that the arguments with these guys aren't the dirt kicking and all out brawls that you would see if they don't think you're working hard. And so most of the arguments that I had, even some that ended up in ejections, were just because of the way the game was being played. Some of them were, "I need to fire up my team." Some of them were, they're just generally mad. Some of them felt like, that they didn't get a fair shake in the situation. So, but when it was all said and done, that was it. You did your, I kind of liken it to the old cartoon. The one guy would watch the sheep and the other guy would try to steal the sheep. At the end of the day, they shook heads and went home. We both had a job to do. And sometimes that just leads to disagreements. But at the end of the day, we're still working for the same company. I work for MLB. He works for MLB. And we just were doing our jobs. And so I think that unless you just had a downright dislike for somebody, everybody understood what the job entailed. And there's a respect factor. They want to be respected. We want to be respected. So you each make your point and you move on.
Well, I played in Reno, Nevada, and there was a little sports bar there called the Little Wall. I don't know if you've ever umpired in Reno. I imagine, okay, you have not. It's in the California League.
Yeah.
And we would go into this little bar and the umpires would hang out there too. And we got to know these guys, and having a few cocktails, and we would discuss trade with these guys. And maybe we shouldn't, maybe we should not have been there. Maybe they shouldn't have been there, but we were. And I thought it was a great opportunity to pick their minds and understand, the intricacies of being an umpire. And because I certainly, if you are a pitcher, you want to know everything you possibly can. You need every scrap of information. This was analytics before it was analytics. This was our form of analytics.
Yeah.
And just learning every aspect of the game. And the umpires appreciated that. They appreciated hardworking players and managers and coaches who care about the game and are, they knew who the guys were who really were out there. And so talk about the respect that you have for the players who really want to make the most of what they're trying to be, as opposed to maybe some players who are skating along a little bit. Maybe you're seeing this in the minor leagues more than the major leagues.
Well, and that was the thing. So from the teaching standpoint, and I saw it as I continued to grow up in the game. So rookie ball is really that first year for players, for umpires, and most likely for managers. It's ex players who are now learning how to manage. And so you get these three entities of people who don't know each other, and they're all trying to vie for their own person. I want you to respect me and what I'm doing. And so there's a lot more confrontations that probably happen in rookie ball. But as you move up through the league, from A ball to double A to triple A, you start seeing the same players. The players start seeing you. You start seeing the same managers. You start seeing the same coaches. And you quickly realize, okay, he's doing his job and I'm doing my job. We're all getting better and we're all getting better. And you continue to build those relationships because you're talking to one another all the time. And so by the time we all got to the big leagues, they already knew me. It wasn't like I was reestablishing myself. I knew them. They knew me. They knew my tendencies. They knew what they could get away with. And so they were the ones who were, that would tell the rest of the team, okay, this is who he is. This is what he can do. This is what you can get away with. So you're developing your who you are all through the minor leagues as they were. And it was that continuously seeing the same players that, like I said, when you get to the big leagues, most of them knew who you were, except when the first couple of years I came up, there was a lot of players who were already established. So it was the younger ones who would join the team that would have to say, hey, he's a good guy. And that's what it was all about. So like I said, when you get to the big leagues, it wasn't as hard because most of the people you already knew.
Well, speaking of big leagues, it took you 5 different leagues: Appalachian, the Midwest, the Florida Instructional, the Southern League, and then the International League between 88 and 97, 98. That you're sowing your oats, you're getting your reps in every one of those. Was there a time that you go, gosh, this is a little bit harder than I thought it would be? I am in the middle of this 3-game summer homestand. It couldn't be any hotter. You got to get through that tough stuff, don't you?
You do. And there's at every level, you're competing with the people you're working alongside of for the next opening at the next level.
Yeah.
And so, but at the same time, you can't show them up on the field. So it's you see people get promoted and you don't get promoted. Or I got promoted and they didn't get promoted. And you're just hoping for that next one step. And then when you got to AAA, you're just hoping that somebody will take an interest in you to get to the big leagues. And, truth be told, the class that I graduated with at umpire school, we had almost 200 students. And I was the only one out of my class to make it to the big leagues.
Wow. That's
so, and you just got to be blessed. I mean, you put in the work, but that doesn't always mean that people are going to think that you're as good as you think you are.
Yeah, it's almost a percentage like getting in the big leagues itself, the amount of kids that play in high school. And obviously Steven knows a lot more, great success in high school, and those numbers dwindle down in community colleges or 4-year universities. And then you get into single A rookie ball, and next thing you know, it's just one of another 100 that gets the opportunity, and you learn to take advantage of it.
Well, and Steven was talking earlier, playing with different teams. That was the thing. If you were a player and you got released from one team, you still had a chance to sign on with another team. As an umpire, you get released, you don't have a chance to sign on with MLB anymore. Now, you can go and become a college umpire or a high school umpire, but you pretty much get one shot at the umpiring in professional baseball.
Real quick, I know from a football perspective, I have a friend from college that was officiating in college, and there are 3 different rankings. I would imagine you just said that baseball is a little bit different, but you get pretty good. You move up to like a non-power 5 conference, and then the real epitome is to go and do an SEC, ACC, Big Ten games. You get paid better. You're looked at a lot more in terms of, hey, you've really got what it takes. And if you miss a call, you might go down to Double A. right? You might be doing the no offense to anybody, but the St. Francis Lambeth game. They just need an official at a lower level. Is there any correlation with that from these different leagues that we've just mentioned and where you've been? Is there a higher or a lower? Is it just AAA is the place you want to be before you go into the bigs?
Yeah, so rookie ball is the lowest level in professional baseball, and then you're just trying to get to the next level, which is A ball, and then you're trying to get to Double A. But you don't ever go backwards. If it becomes a point to where they don't think you're good enough, then you get released.
Okay.
Some guys, after a while, just get frustrated and then quit. Because what we say, see the handwriting on the wall. You're not really getting looked at. Nobody is really taking an interest in you, and you just got to think of your age, and some people are starting to raise a family. Then, what are my best options? So it's survival of the fittest, but you don't go backwards. You pretty much either keep moving up, or that's it.
Well, that brings up,
and you don't become a lifelong minor league umpire.
Yeah, that brings up an interesting point, Paul. If I'm in Double A, who comes to you and says, "Hey, we're really looking at you for next year," and that you might be brought up? Is there a director, or is there somebody that has the authority to be able to make those calls?
So there are minor league supervisors. They don't come to every game, but you might see supervisors maybe 3-4 times during the season, and they'll stay for a series. After each game, you're evaluated, on your plate work, on your base work, things that you could do better. These are things that we want to see from you. And then pretty much at the end of the year, there's a final evaluation that's compiled, and you basically just get a letter saying, okay, you are getting promoted, or we're going to have you going back to the league that you were in for another year, or we're going to release you. So it's just what your work they saw for that year, and they compiled a final evaluation, and you got it in the mail.
Talk about the work schedule. I noticed that in your major league career, the most amount of games was 135. Does that mean that there's a mandatory couple of weeks off that you're granted in the way that the schedule works? Or is that just – go ahead.
We negotiated in our contract for 4 weeks off during the season. Okay. They're written in as vacation, but it's pretty much not vacation. That you got to go home and get done all the things that have been piled up while you've been gone. But it's kind of a way for us to, because we work every game on the road. Like, the team plays half their games at home. All of our games are on the road.
Unless you lived in Chicago, let's say, and you were fortunate enough to get a series when Chicago and Milwaukee's playing, but that's a luck of the draw type of thing, isn't it?
And on a schedule, there might be one Atlanta series, or there might be two, but you don't get many more than that, especially going to all 30 cities now.
Yeah.
So that's where the weeks off, you get a 1 week off at a time, and then there's also 1 week that they negotiated in for each crew to go through replay. So you get a little bit of time off the field, especially in the hot months of the summer. Where you can kind of unwind, catch your breath. You're nursing some little ailments, give you a chance to heal up and come back.
Yeah. You were talking about your relationship with managers and how it develops. I played for a manager named Keith Littman. This is in the A's organization. He later became the director of minor league development for the A's and is really responsible for all the great players who came up in the Billy Beane Moneyball era. And I'll never forget a call. It was at third base, and our guy went for a tag, and the guy slid, and it was a close play, and he called him safe. And I remember what Keith said when he went out to the mound. He said, "I teach my guy to do a slide tag," and he was like describing the fundamental way he taught the third baseman. And I just thought that was a really smart move, because he wasn't just arguing the place. It was kind of like what I was saying to you earlier about watch for the screwball, and so there's so many different ways that managers deal with these guys. But I also wanted to ask you a question. You said you were in the Southern League. Did you ever umpire a game with a catcher in the A's organization named Jimmy Jones, Huntsville, Alabama? That name's
No, I went to Huntsville several times, but I don't remember that name.
I also had I was also a bullpen coach at the University of California in the early 90s, and I'll never forget there was an umpire. I won't mention his name. He had been an umpire in high school, and he was still umpiring, and now he was umpiring in the Pac-10. And our team just did not like this guy, and I mean, it got to the point where it was bad, and they actually put out a petition to the Pac-10 commissioner not to have this guy umpire, and like he didn't umpire our games. And I'll never forget. I know this guy to this day. In fact, I saw him only about 10 days ago at a Hall of Fame event. I've seen this guy lives near where I live. I see him at these events all the time. I've never told him to this day what happened because I don't think he knew. But when you're talking about being evaluated, did you have questionnaires that the league would pass out to players and managers about umpires? And if so, did that factor into your evaluation?
To my knowledge, I don't know that there was any input from players or managers to our supervisors. Now, if somebody talked to one of the supervisors, I'm sure that possibly happened, but I don't have any knowledge that they had direct input as to whether or not I was going to be retained or let go or promoted. The one thing that I was going to say, you know, people kind of often forget is when you start out umpiring, you're only working with two guys on the field. And so there's a lot of things that don't get covered as well as when you add a third umpire and a fourth umpire like you see in the big league. So there's a lot of plays where you just don't have great angles on everything to see it. And that's just kind of what it is. And that's where I think it became more of, if they see you're out there hustling, they're probably less likely to yell at you just because you missed a play if they thought you were doing your best to get into position. Certainly when you start adding more umpires, then the responsibilities change a lot more because they expect you to see a lot more.
Right. I'm good friends with a guy named Buddy Biancalana, who was a major league shortstop from about 82 to 87, Kansas City Royals, and a little bit Houston Astros with Nolan Ryan. He was there with the Royals, Game 6 of the 1985 World Series when Don Denkinger missed the key play at first base.
Obstruction.
Yeah, and incredibly, Danny Cox was the pitcher for the Cardinals that day, and he also had been a teammate of mine. And Buddy just talks about that to this day. He says, you know, if that call had been made, we probably would never have won the world championship. And his whole career was as a Kansas City icon was based upon his being a hero in that World Series. And he still talks about, thank God Denkinger missed that call. So, you know, every once in a while you get a call that some years ago there was an umpire who missed a call in the Detroit Tigers. Was it Villarreal? I don't know if you're familiar.
It was Jimmy Joyce.
Yeah,
Jimmy Joyce was the umpire, and I think it was Galarraga was his name.
I think so. And do you ever look at that and say, there, but for the grace of God, go I?
Well, and that was one of the things that precipitated the replay because, you know, as an umpire, you never want to be known for that missed call or become SportsCenter highlights. And so, you know, I know Jimmy felt awful when that occurred, but you know, those are things that happen. I mean, I'm glad that some of my missed calls aren't more exploited on TV, you know, because you don't want to be that guy. So yeah. And to your point with Denkinger, what probably a lot of people don't know, because Whitey Herzog was the manager of the Cardinals, and he was furious with Denkinger. But when they had a reunion like 20 years later, he invited Don Denkinger to come back and speak at it. And so it was off the field, you know, they had a great relationship. It was just the heat of the moment.
Interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's baseball, and it's something that you love, and we all share it. And it's like I've had many reunions with players on teams that I pitched against.
Right.
We had tremendous rivalries and that bordered on hatred, but that's completely gone.
Right.
Now it's the veterans of many a sage war, and we love to get together and tell these stories. And I'm sure it's just like that with you and former umpires and former players who you get together with.
I think that's the best part when you run into these guys now, and you can go back and you can talk about all the stories and the places you went, and that's the best part of it.
Yeah, well, it's a fabulous game and a fabulous fraternity.
It is.
No question about it.
Well, and you get to be a part of that, Paul. Describe what it was like for you maybe a week before. Did you get the feeling in 95, early in May? Your first game was on May 19th. What was the notification like for you? You were going to have to prepare, right? You had to pack your bags and be with a different group of guys that you haven't worked for. If I understand correctly, you invited your father to that very first game, and there was an empty seat for your mom. Describe what that was like for you, and very, very hectic few days. And, oh, by the way, I've got a new job to do, and I've got to perform at the highest level as well as take care of all this other stuff.
Well, what precipitated that was I actually went to spring training with the National League in '94. And what would usually happen is you would get a chance to go up and work somewhere near the end of the season. And we shortened the season because they went on strike at the All-Star break. So I didn't get my opportunity in '94 to go up. Okay. So in '95, I was like, okay, well, the National League supervisor, Ed Vargo, because we didn't have cell phones back then, had actually tried to reach me about 3 weeks prior to go up to work a game. And I was not at the hotel when he called. And when I got back and got the message, it was only 8 o'clock in the morning. And I called him back. He's like, I already got somebody else. So I was like, oh boy, I'm never going to get a chance to go. And then when he called that morning to tell me to go to Philadelphia, it was, you got to pack your bags, you got to find a flight. And then I was scrambling to call my dad and try to get him to Philadelphia. I would have brought my mother, but she had passed away. So I was, kind of a little disappointed that she couldn't be there to see it. But it was a lot of emotions. It's your first big league game. And so most of it was just kind of a blur. And I remember getting there and just sitting down and just trying to soak it all in. And you're standing in a big league stadium and you're working in front of a much larger crowd. And, it was a little overwhelming.
I played football in the vet for a year. And did you get to see any of the leukemia-ridden cats that are prowling around looking for all the mice and everything?
I have in my later days, probably not that day.
Yeah, for most fans would go, you've got to be kidding me, big league park. But there are some big league parks that have obviously been replaced. And that was one of those ones that needed it. But congratulations, first of all, of getting there. But then, well, I'm in Philly. Really? That's my first game? Why not Yankee Stadium or in Boston?
Mm-hmm. Well, again, that was National League. So
I know. Yeah. Or Wrigley. Javi Lopez lives not too far from here, at least he used to. And he had a son that was a really good player and played travel ball. And my son and his son were about the same age. And I'd see him at the park where we practice every now and then. I said, Javi, you got all these great stadiums that you got to be a part of. What was your favorite? Well, no. What was your least favorite? He goes, Boston. I go, wait a second. You played in Boston. You didn't like it? He goes, dude, I'm 6'4". And the door frames are 6 feet. I had to duck down, and you have no idea how many times I hit my forehead on the top of a door jamb. It's a small stadium. There's no room when they bring the press in at the end. There's barely enough room for you to dress because you're being interviewed or the guy next to you is. And I'm thinking little things that people don't know. You got to see the bowels of all these stadiums and find out which ones were really cool and which ones needed some additional work or obviously revamping. What was your favorite?
I always liked the Atlanta stadiums just because they were we call umpire friendly. I did not like Boston either. It was a great stadium, great city, but there are so many nooks and crannies in that thing that it's not what we call umpire friendly. It's a hard stadium. Tampa is another hard stadium with that white roof and the ceiling, and you can hit this ring and it'd be a home run, and this one and it's not. And so anywhere where there was just, or where fans are real close and can interfere with play, just made it a little more difficult. So I always liked the stadiums where it was clean around the outfield walls, where you didn't have a lot of what we call problems. And so I Atlanta was always one of my favorites, but I love San Fran. I mean, the ballpark there is nice, the new one anyway. Pittsburgh has a beautiful ballpark now, and so I love all of the, where you get a nice skyline view, things where the aesthetics are make just really kind of good to work in.
All right, well, let me mention a couple then. What was Jack Murphy like for you, San Diego?
So, again, I worked in all of the old stadiums before they revamped them all. Nothing stood out good or bad. It was just, it was San Diego, which means you had great weather. That was about the biggest thing I remember.
Yeah, and Petco now is absolutely amazing, where you literally have the left field foul pole is the line of this warehouse that's at a different angle. They didn't tear that down. You mentioned you were a Reds fan earlier. What was Riverfront like for you?
Riverfront was good. I worked in 96 or 7. I worked there on that turf, and it was 153 degrees. The Braves were playing the Reds, and I was working the plate. It was a Saturday. Glavine was pitching, and he wouldn't even take warm-ups in between. And we had 2 outs in the 9th inning, and Javi Lopez hit a game-tying home run, and that put us into extra innings. And I ended up having to leave the game because they thought that I was going to go into severe dehydration.
Wow!
And that was just after John McSherry had died on opening day in Cincinnati, so they were even more cautious, and it was scary. I mean, it was so hot out there. So Riverfront was a place that I love, but that turf, man, in the summertime, it could be. St. Louis was the same way.
I was just going to bring up Busch Stadium. I remember a Dodger game when Vin Scully, they're showing Jerry Doggett, and they had one of those little round temperature gauges, and it was 132, or it was somewhere in that area. You had obviously a little bit more there in Cincinnati.
Hey, Harper, not to interrupt, just as a quick aside, Vin Scully might be at Riverfront Stadium or Busch Stadium. It might be 132 degrees. He always had a suit and tie completely all the way when he was doing the entire game. How he did that, I don't know.
Yeah.
Getting back to you.
Vin Scully was one of the last pictures I took in 2017 when I worked the World Series, and it's one of my most memorable pictures.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, is it pregame? Is this after the game? How did you get to meet him?
Well, this was pregame, but again, when I came up, the announcers, Jack Buck in St. Louis, Harry Callis in Philly, Vince Scully, they would come down to the umpire's room before the game and talk to you. Ask questions, anything that may have happened in a previous game that they were trying to explain to the audience. And so they needed a clarification, or just come down and visit. And so you got to know them that way. And then Scully always gave a shout out to the plate umpire on his broadcast.
Yep.
So it wasn't the first time that I met him, but he had just retired. And so it was like, finally, never asked for a picture when we were both working, and I thought this might be the ideal time. But that's one of the things where you talk about relationships. You built relationships with everybody, not just the people on the field. You built it with the organization. You got to know the general managers because they come talk to you, especially in rain situations or weather conditions. Those are the things that change over the years because you just don't talk to that many people anymore.
And I imagine the relation, it's all quote unquote under, and I'm using air quotes on purpose, the game, to make the game better, to keep it competitive, to make sure that you're and everybody else is doing the very best they can so that those folks that are paying for a ticket to come to the game or the ones that are watching say, I love what I'm seeing and I definitely want to go back and do it again.
Bobby Cox's last game, I worked that division series between the Braves and the Giants, and he was going to retire, and they just lose the series in Atlanta, And afterwards, he's over doing an interview, and I had my family and my kids. My kids were just kind of hanging out in the hallway waiting for us. And he's making his way back to his locker room after they just lost the series, after he's done the interview, and stops and talks to the kids for 5 minutes. Nobody would have expected him to do that, but that's just the kind of person that he was, very personable. Off the field was one of the nicest people you're ever going to meet, but he took the time to just say hey to the kids and, to chat with them just a little briefly.
Yeah. There are so many. You've got the off your right shoulder, there's the home plate with the baseballs on, obviously certain memorabilia that you have and stuff. But, isn't it so cool that whether you're 6 years old and it's your first experience at the ballpark, or whether you're retiring after your last game, there's so many little parts of baseball that you can change people's lives. You have the ability to have effect on that and make fans for life if you do it the right way.
And I think that's the thing. You have to do it the right way. And there were so many people in the game who did it the right way. And that's what you appreciate. And I think, you look at the people that are going into the Hall of Fame and the people that aren't going into the Hall of Fame. And there's something to be said for that. People don't forget.
Yeah, and making the game grow. Okay, all-star games, wild card games, divisional games, league championships, and then you mentioned the 2017 World Series. Obviously, you've earned the respect.
The Astros banging series, right?
That's what they tell me.
Oh boy!
Now, don't pull a Oliver North. I take the fifth. Okay.
Well, I always said I don't know how you can hear somebody banging a garbage can when you got 55,000 people screaming and yelling. So if that happened, I don't know how anybody heard it.
Well, the technology, from what I understand, the basic rule is if you've got somebody working with the organization in the outfield, they better not have any way to communicate with somebody else unless you're doing smoke signals or something like that. And I'm not going to go back into that series, but talk a little bit about the technology and how the game has changed, because people now have the ability in real time to make those types of decisions. You're not really looking for that. That's not what you're there to do. You're calling balls and strikes, fairs and fouls. You mentioned that, but there is another aspect of the game that it is certainly it can be a violation in many respects if it's not monitored.
It can be. And I was a purist of the game, so I always felt like the game should be played and umpired with the human element. And the arguments, as much as, you might have missed a call, were one of the things that people actually came to the ballpark to see. They enjoyed those confrontations between managers and umpires, or players and umpires. When they brought in instant replay, it changed the game drastically. They initially brought it in because of the Jimmy Joyce play with Detroit, but it was to prevent the obvious miss or the game changer. They wanted to be able to get those calls right, and they wanted to be able to fix umpires. They thought that, okay, we're going to fix all of these errors that the umpires are making. And I think and while that's good because it keeps us out of the spotlight, what I think we also saw is we were fixing problems from the players, because now a runner could no longer slide into a base and make it there safely, but not maintain contact with the base, and they tag him, and now he's out. Whereas before, nobody would have said anything. Or if the ball beat the runner and you could get the glove down, even if you physically didn't tag him, but everybody knew that you were out, you were just out. Now with instant replay, we change all that. You've got to actually touch the base with the ball on a double play at second base, where sometimes we would give them in the neighborhood, and it was really for a safety issue. That no longer existed. So the game not only changed from our standpoint, it changed for the way the players had to play, because they got to do a better job of maintaining a base. So it really it's good, but at the same time, you don't have the human element as much.
Well,
imagine
human element, Paul. I need to make a confession to you. I guess you'll be my confessor today. I would take a baseball, and I had my belt buckle. I had read this in ball 4, and I learned it from ball 4, and I would nick the ball against the belt buckle and learn how to manipulate that little seam that I'd nicked to throw make the ball sort of glide a little more and get a little rise out of it. I would also put KY jelly down my pants and just sort of turn around and go down there and get just a little bit, sort of mix it up with some sweat. It worked better if you were in the South, someplace where you already had a lot of sweat going. And I learned how to throw a spitter, and I did that. And so those were illegal things that I did, and I got away with it. I had one umpire say he thought he questioned me, and he thought maybe I was doing something, but he didn't catch me. So those are just a couple of confessions from an ex-pitcher to an.
I've probably heard from more pitchers all the things that they did, and I'm not surprised because I'm like, if you can get away with it, do it. We had catchers that would cut the ball on their shin guards to throw it back. These kids today don't even know how to use a ball like that and do anything with it. So I'm all for, if you can get them out, get them out. And we didn't check any pitchers unless we were directed to do so. Like, we didn't. Well, we say don't go looking for trouble. There were many pitchers who I know were cheating and doing things that they shouldn't have. There's been many that have been caught doing it, but that's just the way the game is.
Well, we lost Phil Necro just recently, and then Jay Howell is my neighbor, and the tongue depressor coming out, and it was the international symbol for what's that, right? With your thumbs out and your palms up, and little things like that. Hey, before we go, and I want to be respectful of your time, talk about the magic mud from, what is that, New Jersey, the little swampy thing, and you got to rub every ball down with that. That's one of the parts of your job that I have to assume after a while, good Lord, we need to get some kid to come in here and do this for us.
So it's Delaware River mud is what they tell us. It's a special mud that they use. And yes, throughout my entire minor league career, we would have to rub 6 dozen, 8 dozen baseballs, depending on how many they gave us before each game. The one thing that changed, though, is when you get to the big leagues, you don't have to rub the baseballs anymore. We have a clubhouse guy, and they usually are responsible for rubbing them. And because Major League Baseball wants every baseball to be rubbed the same, they have one guy who is it, and I don't even know if it's the clubhouse guy anymore, in every ballpark who rubs the baseball, so that he consistently rubs them all the same way. Because some umpires would rub them darker, some would rub them lighter. Pitchers would complain if they were too glossy, or hitters would complain if they were too dark. And so baseball said, okay, we're going to eliminate all of that. But it's a special mud that they use, and it's shipped to every ballpark. And the funniest story is when I was in AAA, Ottawa was one of the cities, and there was a question of whether or not they were going to be able to get the mud into Ottawa. And so the team had to smuggle it in because it's an agricultural product.
I didn't know that. I do know that there's a special spot there in that Delaware River. It's in New Jersey. It's where they farm it, so to speak. And I can't imagine how much they use every year, but that's just one of the numerous things that, that there's no way, but yes, there is. And I guess it's quite a profitable business for the company or for the family that owns that land.
It's George Washington discovered that mud while he was crossing the Delaware River into Trenton.
Was George a American League or a National League?
It was American League, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Hey, Paul, you mentioned when you got called up and your first game was in Philadelphia. That reminds me, my favorite stadium, Phoenix Municipal Stadium in Arizona. And I'll just quickly tell you my big league story, because I was not a major league pitcher, but I pitched in a major league spring training exhibition game. I go to the minor league camp which was basically the junior varsity field over at Arizona State. And I see my name. My gosh, I'm pitching innings 4 through 6 for Oakland against the San Francisco Giants. And it was at Phoenix Municipal Stadium, and it was a Saturday. And you mentioned you called your dad. And I did. I called my dad. I said, Dad, I'm pitching in the big leagues today. It's going to be on radio. And he listened to it. And Bill King. That game, incredibly, there were 5 Hall of Famers in this game. I pitched 3 innings. I struck out 7. scoreless innings, 3 scoreless. I don't know. I just had it. And I had Joe Morgan was playing for the Giants against me. Ricky Henderson was playing for Oakland with me. My manager was Billy Martin, who never said a word, sleeping in the dugout with a hangover. Frank Robinson, the Hall of Famer, was the Giants manager, and 2 Hall of Fame broadcasters, Bill King and Lon Simmons. So I just wanted to mention that that was my day. You had your day. You had your day at Veterans Stadium. I had my day at Phoenix Municipal Stadium, and these are just. Let me tell you, if you're at the Travers household on Thanksgiving, you hear that story because
you bring up Ricky. You bring up Ricky Henderson. One of my first time I saw Ricky Henderson was during an interleague game when before the National League and the American League umpires merged, and so the American League teams, when they would come to the National League, always liked the National League umpires better because they thought that they did a better job, which I said that's one of the reasons we ended up merging. But I didn't know Ricky at all, and I didn't know that Ricky Henderson spoke in first person.
Thank you. I was just going to ask you if that was you tell us about it.
So I called a pitch, and I know he didn't like it, but he turned to me and he says, "Ricky Henderson can't hit that pitch." And I just went, "Well, who the hell are you then?" I didn't know. And I have since learned that that's the only way that Ricky Henderson spoke.
Well, I was in the clubhouse, and here's Ricky Henderson, and someone was quoting Bible verses, and he was talking about John 3:16, which is a famous verse. He loved the world so much that he sent his only begotten son so that it might be saved, right? And Ricky hears John 3:16. He goes, "Well, he only hit in 3:16. Ricky batting 358." That was Ricky. I played against Ricky in high school, believe it or not. Yeah. Great athlete, football star. Had a scholarship to USC to play football if he had gone in that direction.
Yeah,
you get to see a lot of these tremendous athletes carry over of the World Series and League Championship Series. Any special moments that you have, and just appreciation, not again where you pinch yourself, but you go, I'm here for a reason. I'm good at what I do, but I'm calling a NLDS or I'm calling a World Series game.
And certainly the World Series was the most special of all the events I had. But I think for me, what made it even more special is I got to bring my family, my wife and my children, because, when we're gone so long, you kind of miss out on a lot of things as a parent. And I always worried that my kids were not going to grow up, or they were going to grow up rather, and we not have a good relationship. And so to be able to bring them and let them to just enjoy and be a part of some of the, one of the greatest events, and to see it and to see what Dad does, I was really just more happy for them. As happy as I was to be there, I was really, really happy that they got to enjoy that part of it.
That's special memories and all that. And I'm sure respect that sons and daughters all across the world would go, yeah, my dad is pretty cool. He may not be when it comes to decision of whether or not I can stay out till 11:30, but everything else, your dad's pretty cool. Talk a little bit about, I've mentioned this to a couple of folks and the nods of agreement, but what do we do here? I'm going to give you a perfect example. My kids, when they were younger, they played rec ball. And a lot of times you would see a 15 to 20-year-old kid behind the plate, and a couple weeks later, he's not there anymore. There was a 65-year-old gentleman who got chewed out in English and Spanish for a bad call that the other team was a part of. And I saw him a couple of weeks later. And he's from Brooklyn. I think his name was Dave. Let's just call him Dave for the purpose of this. I go, Dave, they were pretty hard on you. One of our parents speaks Spanish, and they were calling you all kinds of names and saying stuff about you and different stuff. He goes, at the time, he goes, I'm 68 years old. I'm from Brooklyn. I've seen all this. I can handle it. He goes, the problem is This 17-year-old kid, he can't handle it, and we lose him forever. Where we don't have enough umpires. We don't have enough people to replace guys like me when I get older. How do you resolve the problem of, even at the lower levels, being able to have enough good people that are able to officiate games in a way that they don't get yelled at by the parents to the point where they go, forget, I don't need this anymore. This isn't worth my time. Has this been a problem that you've noticed?
It is, and especially I teach a lot of clinics, so I hear this all the time. And I don't know that I have the actual solution, but I can tell you what I think needs to happen. First of all, we have young officials who aren't being trained correctly. So we need people to actually train them so that when they're out on the field, they can do a better job. But at the same time, you're taking 14 and 15-year-old kids, and we raise them as our own children to be mindful of our peers and respect adults and, know your place and not say a whole lot. And then we put them out on a baseball field and we tell them, you got to take charge of this game. You got to run this game. You got to tell this guy. And they don't know. They don't know. So there's got to be a learning period to where they have to just, it's like handling situations. You're just going to have to get better and better and better. And that doesn't happen until you get older and older and older. So you got to have older people who are willing to invest in these younger people to go out there with them to help them get acclimated. The other thing that I think needs to happen is what I also call from the league side of it. Like, we always want MLB to protect our officials. I think these sites, wherever these kids are working, whoever is running these places needs to do a better job of protecting their officials. One place that I know of, they tell the parents, they said, if you are obsessively yelling at the officials, you have one of two choices. You either leave and are not welcome back, or you have to officiate the next game. And, when you take this out of the parent, these are not major league kids playing out there. They're not major league umpires out there. So you can't expect these people to be playing the game as well as you would probably see on TV. Parents need to realize that they're living through their children, but their children make mistakes too. My children make mistakes, and I was pretty hard on my children just because as a parent, you want to see them do well. But we have to have people in place to put control on, and protect the officials of these places where they are, so that we're not getting people met in the parking lot afterwards. We're not having just verbal abuse over and over, because we're losing good young officials, but somebody's got to take the time to invest in them to help them get better. And yelling and screaming at them, as we know with our own children, doesn't always work.
Yeah, it seems like especially at 8, 10, 12, Buddy Curry is a friend of mine. He played linebacker with the Atlanta Falcons, and now he has I'm not going to call it a ministry, but a camp that he puts together called Kids and Pros. And part of it is to teach you more fundamentals about football, maybe not for the 5 or the 4-star kid that already has a lot of that, but for the others that need that little confidence break, but then just teaching them how to be men. And one of the things that Buddy had said to me years ago that really sticks to me, he goes, guess what the number one reason is why kids quit and they stop playing, whether it be football, basketball, or baseball? And I said, Buddy, I think I know what you want me to answer. So I think it's injuries, but it might be something a little more severe than that. Tell me what it is. And he said, the car ride home.
Oh, boy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What do you say? As a parent, you doggone it. You're absolutely right. I ruined it. You're supposed to have fun while you're out there. You're going to enjoy it. There are going to be some life lessons. It is competitive, but I want you to have fun. I want you to enjoy this. And we lose that because so many different reasons. I'm not going to blame parents for everything, but
one of the hardest life lessons, and it's true, is you cannot enjoy winning until you experience losing. You have to learn how to lose. And losing is not fun, but you have to learn how to lose in order to be a good winner.
Yeah.
Well, you're absolutely right. That car ride home, that brings back some painful memories, because my dad was a coach and he was into it and he worked me hard and he was a big part of why I was good. And, he expected an awful lot. But there's a reason that a lot of times in corporate America today, we see former military personnel and former athletes who are motivational speakers, or they get hired to do a kind of, that sort of motivational work in a corporate environment. And that's because we are involved, the three of us are involved in a very unique profession, one in which there are no safe spaces, one in which we are out in the crowd, subject to the taunts of the crowd. Think about this, and Harper, think about this. You're a professional football player. Compared to, say, an actor, the actor shows up on set and has about 100 people who are there to make them look as good as possible. Now, you're a professional football player. You arrive at the stadium, and from the time you get there, there's a staff of people, including teammates. It's probably 100 some odd people who are there to make you look as good as possible. Okay? That's sports. There are also about 100 or 150 people, well-trained, and they're on the other side, and their job is to make you look as bad as possible. That is the difference between professional sports and really most other professions. And as I say, there are no safe spaces. This is a profession in which you are going to be out there. You're subject. You really can't hide it. You're in the middle of the field. The spotlight is on you. Could be on the umpire, could be on the player, and it requires a certain attitude and and you learn things. So, Paul, how have you learned these things and passed these on to your kids and people that you know over the years, these lessons that you've learned from being in this very unique situation?
So, like I said, I was one of 9 kids, 7 boys. My dad was a military man. So we grew up with that strict, stern, hard lifestyle. And I thought that's the way that things had to go. You worked hard, then you did good. But when I started having children, I realized that, the one thing that I didn't get from my dad was a lot of love. And I didn't want my children to grow up in that same. So at some point, I had to figure out how to break the cycle of constantly berating my children. And it's not an easy thing to do. And I think that it's, as you get older, you get wiser, you pay attention, you surround yourself with other people who are showing you a better way to do things. And so for me, it's just, I wish I could say I get it right all the time. I still don't, but it's at some point, what's really important is winning the game the most important thing, or is investing internally in my children the more important thing? And so what am I really, I want to have a better relationship with them, and I'm not going to get it with them. I'm not going to get it with anybody if all I'm doing is yelling at them. And so, gosh, it hurts when you lose, and nobody likes to lose, but
you're right.
That's not the end of all. There's other things that are way more important than this. Yeah, it was just a game for me.
Yeah, appreciate you saying that. There's a certain vulnerability when you lose, and lose with respect and dignity versus yelling and screaming and getting upset. And we, as competitors, we don't like to lose. We train to win and all that. An interesting point, real quick, Steven, that you mentioned in terms of acting. Most actors are on a set. A few are in front of a live audience, but the ones that do Broadway, I didn't know this until just recently. I didn't care about the difference. The reason that most actors love going to Broadway is that there's a live audience and they react and they can get booed, just like we all could get booed. We get booed badly when we don't play well. There are certain folks, and if you were in Philly, Paul, for your first game, I would imagine you got booed when you walked out onto the field. Welcome to the major leagues. And that's what they do in Philadelphia. We got booed ahead at halftime in a Monday night game. We were ahead and we got booed off the field. So there's just a different way of approaching all of that. But thank you for your vulnerability and talking a little bit about stuff that's not easy to talk about, mistakes with kids and trying to correct it and do things right, and establishing a loving relationship in spite of the fact that I screwed up, I overreacted, forgive me. Most kids will right away, won't they? They'll, yeah, Dad, I know you screwed up. We all know you screwed up. Thank you for saying you're sorry. It's pretty easy how you can reconcile with that.
Yep.
Appreciate it. Steven, any final thoughts for Paul before we head out today?
Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on 100 yards of football. It was more like 4 bases of baseball today for sure. And that's okay with me. And we go in that direction once the football season is over. And so you bring a lot of new perspective. In fact, the past 3 weeks, we have had a professional scout, a major league broadcaster, and today a major league umpire describe their careers and their expertise on this show, Take 5 with Steven Travers. So I want to thank you very much for your time and your expertise. And it was fantastic. I really appreciated it.
Well, thank you all for having me. I certainly enjoyed this.
Well, we got to go down a little bit of memory lane, and then obviously there are some things and changes in the game itself. We'd love to have you back on, Paul. I think there's another show or two in terms of the direction of the sport, the entirety of the business of professional sports, and your involvement of that is obviously well appreciated. And thank you for taking so much of your busy schedule to be with us here today.
Thank you for the invite, Harper.
You are very welcome. Well, before we go, folks, this is March Madness, and March Madness is a time where a lot of folks like to get involved with the big games. Today is actually the first day of the action there. Every game you have a chance to cash in, and there are promises of high-stakes matchups. There are wild finishes. There are big-time betting opportunities, and you can take advantage of that by getting in touch with MyBookie. You can bet and get as a part of the service there to sweeten the deal for yourself. The smart bettors know that the real money is made one game at a time, and you can take advantage of that as well. You can go to www.mybookie.ag and put in a promotional code. It's MBVIPMB. So Mike Bravo, VIP Mike Bravo. Make sure you do that when you enroll. You can learn more about the system itself, how it works, and you can bankroll your account. You can add deposits to your loan, all the different ways that you would want to take advantage of it. So March Madness is coming up, and you can do that through mybookie.ag. So for Steven Travers, who's done a wonderful job of hosting the show and making sure that our baseball expertise grows each and every time. For Logan Landers, our producer and engineer, thank you, Logan, for coming up with some of those pictures, especially the one of Ricky Henderson, where he goes, now, Ricky Henderson couldn't hit that pitch, right, Paul? Isn't that what he said?
Yes.
And for Paul Nauert, who former Major League umpire and hopefully a guest on another occasion. I'm Harper Lebel saying thank you for tuning in to 100 Yards of Football. This has been Take 5 with Steven Travers. Have a fantastic rest of your day, everybody.